It is time to check in with Amanda Lang. We take a look at business every Friday afternoon. And by the way, you can check out Amanda Lang's show, Taking Stock, on the Iheart Radio network. So, Amanda, the big number today, Canada's unemployment numbers. And worth pointing out, before we get into that in detail, they are completely opposite the numbers that came out in the U.S. today for non-farm payrolls.
Yeah, and I think you've fastened on the right issue here because the numbers in Canada are basically flat. And one thing we know about this labor force survey is it's pretty unreliable. So when you get something as close to zero as we've got, would say, okay, it's not a terrible number. We don't have to say it's 2,000 jobs lost. But you're right to say, wow, it does appear as though the U.S. is having no slowdown. Their GDP is firing on all cylinders. They're creating more than 300,000 jobs in the month. What's going on here? And I think that is the right question. And I started to dig into it a little bit because, obviously our economies are not exactly the same, and we are more reliant on them than they are on us. But it happens to be at a time when oil is at $90 a barrel, right? That happened this week. So that should be good for our economy. So what is happening? I think one thing that's happening is they're still spending a lot more than we are in terms of deficit spending, and that may still be paying off in their economy.
All right, so let's take into account a couple of things in here. I just saw a quick breakdown. Beyond the fact that our numbers were not good, the Canadian numbers, one that really stuck out is youth unemployment, which I think, if I saw this right, is higher now than it's been in almost the last 10 years.
Yeah, and no growth in jobs since 2022 for the segment of 15 to 24-year-olds. That is not good because, of course, that is a stage of life when first of all, that's a flexible part of the workforce, so it's an important part. And second of all, that, of course, is a stage of life where you need to supplement your income to do things like grow your career or save or go to school. So that did jump out at me as well as something, a cause for concern. Having said that, we have a separate report from StatsCan this week. It's for January, so it's a bit rear-looking, but there are still 633,000 unfilled positions in this country. So we still have, remember it used to be 1 million, it's come down. We still have a lot of available jobs in certain sectors. So I would go back to labor force survey can be a bit sketchy and unreliable because of how we gather the data. We do know that there are still jobs to be had out there. So in terms of like how fully employed we are, we're pretty good. We're about where we usually are. We're certainly where we were pre-pandemic.
So how do we tie immigration into this? Because we know there are more people that have come into the country this past year than at any other time. How does this affect the numbers?
Well, it certainly will have an impact. Now, there are couple of pieces to that. The one is we were bringing in temporary workers, and that has now slowed. Now, whether that's already taken place or whether that'll be in the next few months, that's something that actually businesses that hire in that category are very worried about because that was an access to a ready pool of labor that they could just plug and play. The longer term implication of that is maybe they have to work a little harder to get folks who are already here to do those jobs, pay them more, train them up, whatever it is. So there might just be a temporary kind of blip between sort of the available jobs and the people to fill them. But we do know that the record levels of international students and new Canadians, just straight up immigration, has a lag effect. People don't come here and get jobs immediately. There's a settlement period. So although it can be good for the economy, it juices our economy to have higher immigration, there is a period of time where it takes time to settle down and find work. So we're definitely still in that, I would imagine, from a lot of, for instance, the big numbers we saw from last year.
So let me move from the story on employment, to the story on housing. The Prime Minister has spent just about every day over the past week or so making one housing announcement or another. One thing that hasn't been talked about, and I bring this up because I know you have this story to talk about, is the fact that we've sort of been ignoring business here. So you have downtown Toronto office vacancies hitting 18%. I don't know where do you put that in terms of where is that relative to what it's been before? It seems to me like an incredibly high number.
It's a high number, and, this is one people are watching closely. I haven't heard anyone say that there's, grave concern that it'll tip us over into a, real estate-led recession that we've seen in the past. But it is definitely something we need to watch because as leases roll over, we may well see a lot of them change and people shrink their footprint downtown because of the way we're working so differently. So that is something that will put pressure. And where will it put pressure? Well, it'll put pressure on lenders. And the problem with that is if you're a lender and you have a loss in one category, you tend to lend less somewhere else, right? So if the banks experience any kind of downturn from their commercial real estate arms, we may well see it harder to borrow. We're already seeing that, Aaron. I mean, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about productivity and business investment being down. It could just be as simple as interest rates have gone up. Most businesses borrow to invest in their own business, and when it gets more expensive, they can't do it. So while rates are high, we are going to see lower business investment. This other piece of the puzzle just says if the lenders are also getting stretched, that's bad news for longer.
Sure. Yeah. And I know this was an issue in the U.S., right? I mean, they worried about these residential or, these office vacancies hitting multi-year highs as well. But maybe this ties into the next question, which is based on the employment numbers today. Is it likely we get a break from the Bank of Canada with rates going down because this shows the economy is weaker, at least the job section is?
Well, unfortunately, if we're going to tie it to today's data, we can't go there yet because the wage increase in the jobs data was 5.1%. So still too hot.
Okay.
That will be closely watched. And again, when we think about sort of full employment, our economy is still reasonably robust. In a way, this was a kind of a Goldilocks report for the central bank. It shows signs of slowing. It shows, unemployment ticked up. But it isn't a disaster, which is, they kind of want that. They want just cool enough. And this may be getting there. I didn't see anything in here, and I would say they're going to rush to lower. I don't think it changes. I think the U.S. data, interestingly, might change the outlook for the Fed. The U.S. central bank may have some thinking to do about whether they can actually lower rates, given what's happening in their economy. But we are probably on track for a summertime rate cut of some kind.
So with June, July still pretty much in the picture, even with these numbers?
I think that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen any analysis that suggests we should go later than that.
Last story, Canada no longer has female CEOs leading its large banks. When did this happen and what is happening?
Well, a tiny bit of a misleading headline in the sense that we've never really had tons of female CEOs leading our large banks. But because of the HSBC acquisition, which was run by a woman, we no longer have even one woman at the head of a Canadian bank. The story was just kind of taking the time to stop and say, how are we doing on this metric? And the banks work really hard on diversity at every level. They make every effort they can because they're very closely watched. And where it starts to fall apart is as people get more senior. There's lots of reasons for that, and I think we oversimplify this at our peril. But it is for sure true that there are very few very senior women in the ranks of financial institutions. To kind of unpack why that is, we need a much longer conversation. It's not simple, but it is something that they kind of have to own up to every now and then. And this is an example where people will say, great, now we're back to zero.
Well, and that's where we find ourselves today. Amanda, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great to talk.